forced to concentrate on his own enemy. A vaguely familiar abomination that resembled a grotesque mannequin of flesh lunged at him, its hollow eyes full of darkness. A menacing bone scythe cut down, threatening to split Sonny apart. He was somewhat certain that his skin would withstand the edge, but there was no point in taking the risk. The Sin of Solace moved to intercept the strike, much slower than he was used to, but still viciously fast. The blade cut easily through the scythe, breaking it, and then continued forward to sever the flesh mannequin from shoulder to thigh. The spell whispered into his ear, its voice unaffected by the heavy mass of water. "You have slain a fallen monster. Your shadow." With no time to listen to it, Sonny suppressed his revulsion and used the bleeding remains of the abomination to launch himself sideways. A moment later, a chitinous body barreled through the spot he had been occupying. 5 more were already closing in on him from 5 different directions. Sonny took a deep breath. This is not too bad. The situation was dire, but not as hopeless as he had expected. The greatest threat, the terror itself, was currently preoccupied with Bloodwave. The thralls, meanwhile, were numerous and much more powerful than they had the right to be. However, there was one factor working against them. Most of the thralls were no more native to the dark abyss of the ocean than he was. Their movements were purposeful, but a little bit awkward. Their initial assault was dreadful, but mostly because many had been launched forward by the long pieces of white cloth that swirled around and trailed behind the terror, behaving like the tentacles of a giant monster. Now that their momentum was spent, the thralls were much slower and less maneuverable than Neve. And Sonny, too, thanks to the nimble catch. An awakened would have been torn to pieces in an instant, but the 2 masters found themselves at a certain advantage. More than that, Sonny realized that his aspect was not as useless underwater as he had thought. There were no shadows around him to manifest, but that was only because he could not compel living shadows to obey him. Of course, there were plenty. Shadows required a surface to exist, and each thrall's body was a surface. Each of the thralls possessed a shadow, which allowed Sonny to sense their movements, even if he did not see them. It also allowed Sonny to use Shadow Step, as long as the abomination was large enough. As 5 thralls lunged at him, Sonny swam forward, dodged the claws of an especially large nightmare creature, and dove into its shadow, appearing on top of the chitinous monstrosity that had missed him a few moments earlier. The Sin of Solace plunged through the thick carapace, instantly killing the abomination. "You have slain a fallen beast. Your shadow." Sonny almost grinned. So many fragments. He pushed himself off the convulsing carcass, narrowly escaping the cloud of blood, and looked up just in time to see Neve clashing with another thrall. The bone harpoon once again struck first, beheading the hollow-eyed creature. However, this time the Nightwalker was a split second too late to dodge the incoming attack. Even though the thrall had lost its head, the creature's tail still flew forward, carried by momentum and inertia. The long, vicious spike at the end of the tail struck Neve square in the chest, easily piercing the nacreous shell armor and plunging deep into his body. Then it emerged from his back. Sonny's eyes widened, but then something strange happened. The scion of the House of Night seemed to ignore the terrible wound, and in fact, there was no wound. Instead, it was as though Neve's body had turned into liquid. The spike pierced that liquid and then flew out of the master's side without leaving a trace. A second later, Neve turned solid once again, already attacking the next thrall. His movements were swift, graceful, and flowing. Sonny tore his gaze away and lashed out with the Sin of Solace to deflect a blow from a hollowed-eyed thrall. Neat. Behind them, Bloodwave had finally reached the beautiful, harrowing white blossom. The monstrous killer whale cut through the crimson darkness, descending upon the ethereal blossom of flowing white cloth. His mouth opened, revealing a palisade of terrifying fangs. His blue eyes had turned deep red, glowing like spotlights and full of murderous intent. As the great predator approached, the pallid flower exploded with movement. The shorter petals swirled, creating a barrier of white cloth around the small, unclear shape hidden in their center. The longer ones, which had been drifting gracefully on the currents, suddenly contracted and shot forward like tentacles. Bloodwave roared. Powerful currents surrounding his body churned, surging forward to meet the petals. He dodged nimbly, continuing to move forward as his jaw closed on one of the white tentacles. There was no blood, no torn flesh, and no crushed bone. It was as though the petal was indeed nothing but white silk, and damaging it was like cutting a piece of lifeless cloth. Sonny did not see much of what happened after, because he had his own problems to worry about. There were just too many thralls around him, all powerful enough to pose a serious threat, even with most of them assaulting the port fortress somewhere far away and above. The Terror's drowned guard was enough to kill him and Neve 10 times over, if they were not careful. Damn it! Propelling himself forward through the dark water, Sonny collided with a hideous creature made of iron and bone. The Sin of Solace passed through the abomination's body, cleaving it apart. However, the next thrall was already upon him. 2 human hands wrapped around his throat, trying to rip it open with dreadful strength. Sonny's skin turned hard as stone and resisted the pale fingers, but he still found himself being strangled. Using shadow sense to perceive the shape of the enemy, Sonny slashed back with the jade sword, severing both of the arms. Tearing the cold hands off, he twisted and kicked back, pushing himself and the thrall away from each other. His adversary was hindered and maimed, but not eliminated, and more were already closing in. This is not going to work. He was doing well, for now, but death was only one mistake away. Sonny relied on his superior speed and maneuverability to slay the thralls, which meant that the moment he was immobilized or stalled, the tables would be turned. He was not a stranger to fighting with everything on the line, but not in an environment as strange and unfamiliar as the depths of the ocean. It was far easier to make a fatal mistake in a place the rules of which he did not know. Sonny willed himself to swim forward, then, hesitantly, turned onto his back and looked in the direction where Neve was battling a throng of abominations. The Night Walker moved with ease and graceful precision, navigating the dark waters like a creature born in and for the depths. He certainly knew the rules. An idea slowly formed in Sonny's mind. He adjusted his battle strategy to always keep Neve in his sight, earning a few shallow scrapes as a result. Sonny was a talented fighter, possessing combat intelligence on par with the best of the best. He had plenty of insight into the underlying laws of conflict, and much better than that, his mastery of shadow dance allowed him to read most of his opponents like an open book. And that was exactly what he had been doing throughout this battle. Like most of the battles of the Antarctica campaign, there were too many thralls around to truly grasp all of their patterns, but their rudimentary battle styles were also crude and unsophisticated. Sensing the movements of their shadows for a few moments was enough to gain a shallow but sufficient level of understanding. However, that approach might have been the wrong one today. So instead of trying to shadow his enemies, Sonny concentrated his will on trying to shadow his ally. Neve's battle style was much more complex, profound, and refined. In terms of scope and sophistication, it was up there with the most intricately designed combat art Sonny had witnessed. As expected of a scion of a great clan, that style was not something that he could learn in mere seconds or even several minutes. But even the few minor insights Sonny did gain were already enough to qualitatively change his performance. So that's how you do it. The lessons he learned from using shadow dance to study how the Nightwalker moved were not anything grand, but they were extremely valuable. What better teacher could there be than a man supposedly carrying the lineage of Storm God, the god of the depth? It was all about how his body related to the water, and how the water related to his body, how to position himself to cut through it unimpeded, and how to use the mass of water to his advantage. Shadow dance and the harsh training Sunny had put himself through to master its first steps made both his mind and body extremely malleable and adaptable. That was why he was able to quickly put what he had just learned into practice, changing minute details of how he moved, which muscles he strained, and the timing of sending targeted impulses of essence to reinforce them. Sunny was suddenly able to navigate the dark abyss much more freely. He felt more in control of his environment now, working with it instead of against it to achieve his goals. A massive nightmare creature lunged at him, its claws missing the target by a few centimeters, just as Sunny had planned. He cut into the abomination and at the same time circled around it, using the carcass to hide from the next enemy. A moment later, the second thrall was dead too. Good. But then, there was even more Sunny could do by fusing his unique abilities with what he had learned from Neve. Using the Feather of Truth to make himself lighter or heavier, he could float up or plummet deeper like a stone. Using Shadow Step, he could jump between the large abominations. He could even turn incorporeal and cling to their bodies as a shadow. If he used all of this smartly, the ocean would not be as inhospitable. It was even a little liberating. Being able to freely move in 3 dimensions instead of just 2 opened up all kinds of neat tricks he could pull. The only limit was his intellect, cunning, and imagination. Get ready, bastards. Brandishing the Sin of Solace, Sunny cut through the dark water to meet the attacking thralls. A pale smile appeared on his face. Sunny and Neve fought against the drowned guardians of the Terror, while Bloodwave assaulted the eerie flower of white cloth itself. From what Sunny could see, and he rarely got the chance to glance in that direction, embroiled in a furious and lethally dangerous battle of his own, the corrupted creature and the saint were at an impasse of sorts. The Terror did not seem to have a lot of physical power. His graceful petals possessed a harrowing strength, of course, but not enough to threaten the Transcendent in his bestial form. Not all saint transformations were those of beasts, and out of the ones that were, not all possessed overwhelming physical might, but Bloodwave certainly did. The monstrous killer whale attacked again and again, and the pallid blossom avoided his teeth and fangs again and again. Its shorter petals danced, making the Terror glide away, moving in irrational and mesmerizing patterns. The sight of it was eerily beautiful. Its longer petals, though, some of them hundreds of meters long, slithered through the crimson darkness like white tentacles, battering the great predator and trying to wrap themselves around his enormous body. Nevertheless, Bloodwave did not seem hindered. A few of them were already torn apart, swaths of billowing white cloth, drifting silently into the dark depths. Some distance away from the 2 clashing giants, Sunny and Neve were feverishly battling the legion of hollowed-eyed thralls. The cold abyss was littered with blooming clouds of blood and sliced remnants that floated around them like a morbid veil. Almost 100 abominations had already been slain, but twice as many remained. Curse it! The Night Walker was a good partner in this battle, perhaps even the best Sunny could have hoped for. And yet, he still missed his shadows. Granted, neither would have been of much help in the depths of the ocean. Stone Knights were not exactly the best divers, and neither were horses, as far as he knew. Sunny, meanwhile, had grown somewhat confident about fighting underwater. He had managed to learn a few things by observing Neve and understood how to deal with the unbearable pressure by borrowing from his experiences with the crushing. Everything was going well. Sunny decapitated another thrall, then spun, bringing the Sin of Solace in front of him. A creature that had been hidden by a cloud of blood suddenly lunged forward, only to impale itself on the Jade Jian. He had sensed its shadow long before the abomination appeared in view. His lungs were burning. which was a concerning thing when one was deep below the surface of the ocean. However, Sunny knew that it was just a sign of physical exertion. The essence pearl was still supplying him with a steady stream of air to breathe, and although he felt tired, that tiredness was nowhere near debilitating. With every kill they made, the number of thralls attacking Sunny and Neve diminished. They had already survived the assault of the full 300, so fighting against the remaining 2 was much more manageable, and it would only grow more manageable soon. So why do I feel so uneasy? Sunny shivered, allowing himself to drift for a brief moment. Indeed, even though they seemed to be prevailing, his heart was growing heavier with each kill. It did not make any logical sense, but nevertheless, Sunny's intuition seemed to be telling him that he was missing something. But what? There was not much time to think between the clashes with the abominable thralls, mostly because Sunny had to spend that time observing the dark waters around him and frantically calculating how and where to move to survive, as well as put himself in a position for the next attack. And yet, the longer the battle went on, the more it felt as though something was not right. What is it? He would have said that it was too easy, but it was not. Fighting hundreds of menacing thralls underwater was one of the hardest and most demanding battles he had the misfortune of going through in the Southern Quadrant. Sunny was not only pushing his limits, he had ventured well past them, going so far as to learn an entirely new dimension of combat. Even then, it was barely enough to keep him alive. Perhaps it was the fact that the terror of LO-49 had yet to launch a devastating mental assault on them, or pull some other diabolical trick. Not that it was not already doing more than enough. In fact, the powers that the Pallid Blossom wielded were truly harrowing. It was controlling thousands of thralls that laid siege to the port, spreading its hex through the garrison of the fortress and the First Army soldiers manning the northern section of the wall, puppeteering hundreds of abominations that sought to kill Sunny and Neve, and fighting a powerful saint, all at the same time. It was just that Sunny had expected something more. The bitter defeat he had suffered at LO-49 left a mark on his heart. Although he did not want to admit it, the truth of the matter was that Sunny was afraid of the terror. Was that fear irrational? The marble shell gives me high protection against mental attacks. It is currently an ascended attribute, one rank below the terror. It is also augmented by shadows, Bloodwave and Neve. I don't know what tools they have to defend their minds, but anyone from a great clan has to have a great arsenal of memories at their disposal. Maybe the truth was just that simple. The 3 of them were too tough to be affected by the terror's greatest weapon. As he dispatched another thrall and briefly met Neve, the 2 of them grasping hands to repel each other in different directions. The Sin of Solace sighed. Such a fool. Sunny grimaced, raising the Jade Jian to meet another enemy. He had grown accustomed to the cursed sword striking at his deepest insecurities, the lack of education and intelligence, mostly emotional, being one of them. However, why had the Sin of Solace spoken now? What was I thinking about? The 3 of them were highly resistant to the terror's most powerful means of attack, and before that, about how many things the creature was doing at the same time. From fighting Bloodwave to controlling the assault on the port fortress, he continued to slay one thrall after another, becoming more and more distracted by the feeling of impending doom. His intuition was almost screaming now. I don't get it! Damn! Sunny tore through a group of abominations, gritting his teeth. Luckily, there were far fewer of them left, so he had some space to think. Because of that, a random thought found its way into his mind. I wonder how Dale is doing. Then he froze, which almost cost him an eye. Dale and the other defenders of Falcon Scott must have obliterated a lot of the thralls on the shore by now, and here in the depths of the ocean, Sunny and Neve had killed their share as well, and the terror, which had been spread thin, controlling all of them, was freed from the burden of commanding the thralls. With each of its puppets the humans destroyed, the creature was gaining back the ability to concentrate all its powers into a single point. Suddenly chilled to the bone, Sonny turned around to see the battle between the Terror and the Saint, but he was a few moments too late. Some distance away, the ethereal flower suddenly swirled, its beautiful petals billowing outward like a current of white silk. Ghostly tentacles of flowing cloth shot toward the charging Saint, too swift and insidious to dodge. As Sonny watched in fear, Bloodwave's head became enveloped by the silk, his glowing eyes disappearing from view. The body of the monstrous killer whale shuddered, moved weakly, and then grew strangely still. Gods! He saw something much more frightening as well. 2 of the longer petals were already flying through the dark abyss, approaching Sonny and Neve. They were fast. Too fast. Inescapable. He had no time to dodge or even react. There were no thralls close enough to hide in their shadow, and not enough time to try and swim away. All Sonny managed to do was slash forward with the Sin of Solace. The jade blade met the white petal, cutting through the cloth. A small piece of it drifted away, but the petal was not slowed down at all. It seemed to unfurl into a vast expanse of billowing silk, surrounding Sonny from all sides. Then, he was wrapped in the cold whiteness, encompassed and immobilized by it. The feeling of smooth satin brushing against his naked skin made Sonny shudder. Damnation! Then the world grew still. The dark abyss of the ocean disappeared, replaced by an eternity of fluttering white cloth. His exhaustion and fear disappeared too. His memory, foresight, awareness, intent, and resolve were gone. His mind was empty. Sonny vaguely remembered having thoughts, desires, and hopes, but those words seemed senseless now, their meaning unfathomable. The word he had used to describe himself, Sonny, was meaningless too. What a strange one it was. Surrounded by billowing silk, he sensed movement. Shadows were moving around him. He was moving too, being drawn closer to the largest one. With each passing moment, his sense of self was dissolving more and more. Soon, it would be gone completely. And then, something new, something old, something darker, something waiting was going to take its place. He felt at peace with that. He felt empty. The emptiness was comforting. There was just one thing blemishing the peaceful white flawlessness of the empty satin world. A sinister, mocking voice. It whispered into his ear, gloating. Here we go. A pathetic end for a pathetic fool. His voice, Sonny suddenly remembered. Lost from Light. That was his name. Spurred by the hateful voice, that one memory unlocked all the rest like a key. What is going on? He struggled against the white cloth enveloping his body, but it was hopeless. The terrifying understanding flooded his mind, making him remember what had happened and what was happening, what was probably about to happen. Sonny's consciousness was strangely split. One part of it sensing the reality of being dragged through the mass of water by one of the Terror's petals, the other still lost in the endless expanse of billowing silk. He could feel a boundless alien presence encroaching upon both, seeing through his eyes, thinking his thoughts, and hungrily wanting more. Its progress was slow and labored, but inevitable. Sonny tried to fight against the harrowing invader, throwing all of his willpower into a fierce assault, but it simply shattered against the vast, ancient, malevolent enormity of it, like glass. Not good. His thoughts were slowing down, suspecting that fighting the Terror in the mindscape was a futile endeavor. Sonny tried to free himself from the physical bonds instead. However, His arms were pressed tightly against his body, and the white cloth refused to part before the blade of the Sin of Solus, like the flesh of other nightmare creatures usually did. He wasn't going to cut through it while only being able to move his wrist a tiny bit.
Curse it!
Sonny could vaguely sense the shadows of Neve and Bloodwave some distance away from him. It seemed that he was the only one trying to struggle against the terror's petals. Both were probably still mesmerized. Why was he not then? The Sin of Solus and possessing a true name might have helped, but it could not have been the only reason. Bloodwave was the enigmatic saint's true name as well, and yet the monstrous killer whale was motionless, silently drifting on the currents in the dreadful embrace of white silk. This meant that this small degree of awareness was probably the result of Sonny's unreasonably high resistance to mental attacks. Even though he now shared his head with the terror, a part of his mind was still fighting against it. What good was it, though? Since Sonny could neither free himself nor stop the creature from replacing his very self. As he was drawn closer and closer to the beautiful blossom of white silk, he could feel himself growing insubstantial. With each movement, his thoughts became less his own. His eyes stared at the silken veil, moving on their own, as if something else was looking through them. Finally, Sonny felt true horror. He had been scared before, but never like this. Sensing something else take possession of his body, while utterly helpless to resist the slow dissolution of his will, it was the realization of all his deepest, most guarded fears. And it was being done by the terror of LO-49, the hateful, abominable creature that had already defeated him once. Full of dark resentment, Sonny gritted his teeth and summoned two memories. That much he could still do at least. One was a small lantern cut out of obsidian, and the other was a fearsome mask of black lacquered wood with vicious fangs and 3 sharp twisting horns. Weaver's mask. Sonny had not called upon it in a long time. It frightened him as well, almost as much as the terror. Trying not to think about what he was about to do, Sonny activated the single enchantment of the Shadow Lantern, commanding it to devour all light around it. There was no light to devour in the dark abyss, but that was not what he wanted. What he really wanted was for the divine memory to gobble up as much of his essence as it could. The Shadow Lantern burned through most of the essence Sonny had in the time it took the white tendril of silk to bring him to the pallid blossom. There was very little of it left now. Sonny felt like his mind was almost gone, struggling to wrestle control of his face from the terrifying presence. He forced himself to grin. He wanted that smile to be menacing, but all it ended up being was weak and scared. A pity. He sensed a vast shadow that was full of harrowing wrongness, looming close, and thought, "You wanted to see through my eyes? Well then, look." With that, Sonny reached into Weaver's mask and activated its second enchantment. Where is my eye? Sonny had never even thought about using that deadly enchantment after the first time. Back then, moments before falling into the sky below, he had activated it out of sheer desperation. His gamble had paid off, but it almost cost him his life. Where is my eye allowed the wearer of the mask to gaze upon the tapestry of fate in all its harrowing glory. The endless, beautiful eternity of twisting threads transfixed all existence, stretching infinitely in every direction, as well as into the past, present, and future. It connected everyone and everything like an inconceivable, unknowable web. Weaver might have been capable of witnessing the great tapestry, but mere mortals like Sonny were not. A single moment of looking at fate had almost caused his mind to collapse. If his essence had not run out after that single moment, he would certainly have been killed. His head exploding in the most violent fashion. Luckily, he had gotten off easy by only experiencing unimaginable pain and pure agony, the memory of which still made him shudder. The terror was very welcome to try doing the same. As the last of Sunny's essence was disappearing, causing him to experience painful backlash, the inconceivable sight of the great tapestry of fate superimposed itself through and above the world. It was stunning, breathtaking, and utterly overwhelming, as he had remembered. However, funnily enough, Sunny saw the beautiful threads differently this time. To him, they seemed like nothing but chains now. Granted, he did not linger trying to look, only catching a small glimpse of the cosmic tapestry, prepared for what was to come. Sunny used a little, but rather devious trick. His consciousness was still split between reality and the illusion of the endless expanse of billowing white silk that the terror had created to mesmerize its prey. So, Sunny made himself blind to the actual world, concentrating entirely on the illusory realm of pure whiteness. That was why the terror, who had almost stolen his body and was now looking upon the world through his eyes, was the only one to gaze upon the harrowing infinity. Sunny felt the white silk enveloping him quiver, as if the pallid blossom was convulsing. Even though his head was full of splitting pain because of that one short glimpse of the strings of fate, his weak smile finally turned into a real grin. "Look well, wretch." A split second later, his essence ran dry, and the deadly enchantment deactivated. The tapestry of fate disappeared, and Sunny suddenly found himself freed from the alien presence devouring his mind. Or rather, it was still there, but now stunned and writhing in pain. The physical binding of white silk that wrapped his body had come a little loose as well. Not wasting a single moment, Sunny used that slack to thrust his hand forward. The tip of the Sin of Solace pierced the wall of the cloth prison and then moved upward, cutting a vertical rift in it. A second later, he sliced the white petal open and burst into the dark water, incredibly happy to be in the oppressive embrace of the dark ocean once again. Sunny hastily studied his surroundings, knowing that he did not have much time. Witnessing the tapestry of fate had not killed him as an awakened monster, so he doubted that it would kill a corrupted terror. If that was truly what the dreadful flower of silk was. In any case, the creature would most likely not stay stunned for too long. Currently, the pallid blossom seemed to be seizing, its petals contorting in grotesque convulsions. The graceful harmony of their eerie, beautiful dance had been broken, replaced instead by chaotic and jittery movements devoid of any logic. The thralls appeared to be pained and disoriented too. Looking at the agony consuming the abominable creature, Sunny became even more convinced that fate was something that only gods were meant to see. Or maybe no one at all. If even a corrupted abomination of great and terrible power was reduced to a convulsing mess, what hope did mere humans have of withstanding the sight of eternity? Shrugging off his own pain, Sunny glanced briefly at Neve and Bloodwave. They seemed to be showing signs of life, but had not even begun trying to free themselves yet. Chances were the terror would come to its senses before they ever could. He had to finish the battle himself. Gripping the hilt of the Sin of Solace, Sunny propelled himself forward. He fought against the weakness that had been left behind by draining all of his essence, pushing his body through the water as fast as he could. The nimble catch had turned into a useless piece of net, its active enchantment silent. Luckily, the pearl enchantment of the Essence Pearl was a passive one, so he could still breathe. His muscles and lungs were burning by the time he reached the white flower. It had only been a dozen seconds or so, but the convulsions of the billowing petals were already growing weaker. Feeling cold terror grasp his heart, Sunny gritted his teeth and dove into the mass of white silk. His goal was the small shape hidden in the center of the petals, swimming between the dancing swaths of white cloth. Sunny could not shake the feeling that he would be caught again at any moment, that his mind would be devoured and his will would be replaced by something alien and vile. Nevertheless, he pushed forward, After an eternity of fear, he finally reached the heart of the pallid blossom, and there, Sonny froze for a moment. In front of him was a shape wrapped in white silk. He could see the vague contours of a human body. Desiccated and short in stature, it was feminine and small, almost delicate, pressed tightly against the wrappings. A hint of a face could be discerned, 2 hollow pits where eyes should have been, and a larger one of a mouth that seemed to be open in a silent, eternal scream. A cold understanding suddenly dawned on him. Looking at the expanse of white cloth extending from the wrapped body, he realized that what he had thought to be a flower was not a flower at all. It was simply a great burial shroud of white silk, its sleeves and drapings drifting in the cold, dark water. Sonny lingered only for a split second, then grabbed onto the desiccated body, coming face to face with it, and dove his sword through its heart. A strange, sorrowful sensation overwhelmed him for a moment. Then, the white cloth around Sonny suddenly exploded with frenetic motion, and soon grew still. In the silence that followed, the spell whispered solemnly into his ear. You have slain a corrupted terror. The voice of the spell resounded in the boundless darkness of the ocean, making Sonny shudder. You have slain a corrupted terror, Sibyl of the fallen grace. Your shadow grows stronger. As the veiled body drifted down, wreathed in billowing white silk, one last whisper brushed against his ears. You have received a memory. The terror was falling down, deeper and deeper into the cold abyss. Sonny spared one last glance at the pallid blossom of the great burial shroud, knowing that it would be consumed forever by the dark depths soon. Then he turned away and tiredly pushed himself in the opposite direction. Sonny was not in great shape. His mind was slowly recovering from the dreadful mental assault, but his head was in the throes of a splitting headache, thanks to catching the smallest glimpse of the tapestry of fate. His body felt weak and feverish, still suffering from the backlash of draining all of his essence. There were the remnants of the trauma caused by touching a nightmare gate as well. Sonny felt like he was about to cough his lungs out. Holding it back was not an easy task, and yet a hint of dark, somber glee still managed to overcome the cold numbness that encompassed his battered mind. I did it. I killed that vile thing. In the end, he ended the terror with his own hands. The stain of their disastrous first meeting had not been erased, but his failure at LO49 was vindicated now, somewhat. Or rather, it would be if he managed to return to the surface alive, which, looking at the dark expanse of the ocean around him, Sonny was not sure what he would be able to do. Curses. The terror, Sibyl of the fallen grace, was dead and drifting lifelessly into the lightless depths. However, its thralls had not perished with their master. They seemed directionless and sapped of power, but there were still almost 100 of them left in his current state, and especially without the active enchantment of the nimble catch, Sonny did not count his chances against the creatures as high. A dark grimace contorted his pale face. Essence. I need essence. Even knowing that it would not be enough, Sonny dismissed Weaver's mask and the shadow lantern. A tiny stream of essence fell into the arid desert of his drained soul and was instantly consumed by his body. The feeling of weakness diminished a little, but not nearly enough to change the situation. The thralls were already coming to their senses, their hollow eyes peering through the mass of dark water at Sonny, Bloodwave, and Neve. Some had begun moving in their direction, full of murderous intent. Bloodwave and Neve, Sonny glanced at his companions, hoping against all hope to see them up and about. Neve was still stunned, drifting lifelessly on the currents. As Sonny watched, the monstrous killer whale flinched, then jerked his head sideways. The span of white cloth still wrapped around it slid off, revealing the giant beast's glowing blue eyes. For a moment, they seemed disoriented, but then, sharp intelligence shone through the fog of confusion, obliterating it. An indignant growl escaped from Bloodwave's mouth as he gazed at the drowning remains of the Terror and the approaching swarm of the liberated thralls. The Saint lingered for a moment, then moved his giant body and shielded Sonny from the enemies with its bulky mass. The enormous jaws snapped, pulverizing the fastest of the approaching nightmare creatures. Then the killer whale surged forward to meet the rest of them. In the next couple of minutes, a one-sided massacre took place in the dark depths. Sonny realized in the first few seconds that his participation wasn't required. Instead of getting in the way, he swam closer to Neve, grabbed him, and dragged both of them further away from the boiling battlefield. Sunless? The Nightwalker's voice sounded weak in his mind, but he was conscious at least. Sonny nodded, then turned the two of them so that Neve could see his uncle obliterating the thralls. After a few seconds of silence, he heard the Nightwalker's voice again. "What about the Terror?" Sonny thought for a moment, then dragged his finger across his throat. Good." The two of them watched silently as Bloodweave tore the 100 abominations to shreds. Watching a Saint in action was a sobering experience, to say the least. Sonny shuddered at the thought of having to battle someone like that directly. And yet, the Terror of LO-49 had dealt with the fearsome Transcendent, only to end up being dealt with by Sonny. "Don't get a big head now." Sonny was all but certain that Mordred had already killed a Saint. However, knowing how diabolical that fiend was, that clash might not have been a direct battle either. On the other hand, Sonny could easily imagine the Prince of Nothing doing exactly that and crushing a Transcendent in a straightforward fight somehow, in order to terrify the rest of his enemies and break their wills. Would Sonny be able to do the same? "I have no reason to find out," Sonny thought. He had no desire to kill Saints. If anything, Sonny wanted to have more of them around. The more, the merrier. The position of the First Army in eastern Antarctica was much better than here, in this godforsaken hell, and the Second Army was already on its way. However, the chain of nightmares was far from being over. Who knew what would happen in the coming months? It had taken Bloodwave no more than 2 minutes to annihilate the thralls. Sonny had thought that the Saint would rest for a bit after having to fight a corrupted Terror and its minions. But the great predator did not waste any time. Returning to where Sonny and Neve were floating, he studied the two masters with one of his giant glowing eyes, then shifted slightly. The tall fin that they had ridden into the depths was now right in front of them. Sonny helped Neve find a handhold, then tiredly clutched the steel armor himself. "Time to get back." The pallid shape of the slain Terror had long ago disappeared from view, devoured by the lightless depths. The mangled corpses of the thralls still drifted around them, slowly being carried away by the currents. Ignoring them, the giant killer whale bellowed and surged forward. This time, he was moving up. On the way back, Sonny couldn't help but retreat inside himself. He did not know what was happening on the surface, whether the port fortress still stood, whether the devouring cloud had breached the walls of the city. The very idea of a world outside of the cold, dark, muted, oppressive abyss of the ocean seemed strange and distant. Chances were, he would have to fight again as soon as Bloodweave delivered them under the walls of Falcon Scott. However, Sonny was too tired, both physically and mentally, to care. He just wanted to forget about everything and rest for at least a short while. Luckily, the killer whales seemed to be moving much slower as they ascended from the depths. That most likely was done for the benefit of Sonny and Neve. Even though they were masters, they were still fundamentally humans. Neither would have died from the decompression sickness, but it could do a lot of damage to their already strained and battered bodies. Sonny was not sure if he was even susceptible to the bends, considering how strange and tenacious his blood was. However, he welcomed the short moment of respite. Somber and unchanging, the dark ocean remained the same as they retreated from its cold depths. The only difference Sonny could feel was the slow, gradual lessening of the pressure that weighed on him like a slab of stone. With each minute, his body seemed to become a little lighter, and breathing was a little easier. He closed his eyes, allowing the cold currents to carry him. Right. There was a memory. I should probably study it before we return to the battlefield. Sonny was in no shape to fight, but he might have no choice but to join the battle soon. He had to use any advantage there was. He summoned the runes and watched as they shimmered in the darkness, slowly forming into coherent shapes. Before turning his attention to the memories, he briefly checked the list of shadows. Both Saint and Nightmare seemed to be alive. Relieved, Sonny let out a mental sigh and looked up. A new set of runes appeared at the end of the list of his memories. Memory, Shroud of Graceless Dusk. He lingered for a moment. That was the second memory in his arsenal, named after a burial garb. Was the spell trying to insinuate something? Too apathetic to care, Sonny shrugged and continued to read. Memory rank, Transcendent. Memory tier, 6. Memory type, Armor. He closed his eyes again for a moment. A transcendent memory of the 6th tier was the strongest he had ever received after slaying an enemy. Of course, since Sybil of the Fallen Grace was the strongest enemy he had ever slain. There was the spawn of the vile thieving bird as well, but Sonny did not really consider that a true, honestly earned kill. In any case, the Shroud of Graceless Dusk had to be an extremely potent memory, and it was an armor too. Something that he desperately lacked at the moment. Lucky. Somewhat encouraged, he opened his eyes and looked back at the runes. Memory description. Sibyls were the heralds of the gods and conduits of divine grace. Many mysteries were known to them, and so were many truths. There was one being, though, who knew much more. The Graceless Caitiff, Demon of Dread. He knew every truth there was because he knew everyone's fear, even that of the gods. And so, seeking salvation from the end, the Sibyls abandoned the mortal realm and guided their people on a long and arduous journey. They led them far away across the lands consumed by war to the tomb of Ariel. There, they found solace, safety, and shelter. In time, the voices of the gods grew silent, one after another, leaving behind only a vast and dreadful silence. That was how the Sibyls embraced the estuary, and that was how they fell. Sonny frowned. That guy again. By now, he was all but certain that the region of the dream realm where the Chain of Nightmares had originated and the Black Pyramid, hidden within, had something to do with Ariel, the Demon of Dread. Was the pyramid his tomb then? How would a demon die? And who would build him an opulent grave? And what did the great river that allegedly flowed back in time have to do with any of that? Its estuary was mentioned in the description of the stifled scream as a place where a dreadful secret had been hidden. Was this the same estuary? The Sibyls had been, apparently, some sort of oracles that received revelations from the gods, Once the gods died, those revelations stopped. The timing didn't make sense, though, because the tomb of Ariel had seemingly existed long before that. Mysterious. With a tired sigh, Sonny tried to ignore the myriad of questions and turned his attention to the enchantments of the Graceless Dusk. There were no less than 6 of them. Enchantments. Blessing of mind. Blessing of soul. Blessing of spirit. Blessing of flesh. Sublime silk. Blessing of dusk. Somewhat invigorated, he studied the descriptions. Blessing of mind. Enchantment description. This memory enhances one's mental acuity. Blessing of soul. Enchantment description. This memory enhances one's rate of passive soul essence replenishment. Blessing of spirit. Enchantment description. This memory enhances one's ability to endure and recover from mental fatigue. Blessing of flesh. Enchantment description. This memory enhances one's ability to endure and recover from physical fatigue. Sublime silk. Enchantment description. This memory is woven out of sublime mystical silk. It is impervious and possesses a beautiful splendor. Blessing of dusk. Enchantment description. This memory carries the blessing of dusk, the last sibyl of the estuary. The wearer can establish a mental connection with another being to hear their voice and thoughts or make their own be heard. Sonny blinked a couple of times and then apathetically dismissed the runes. Well, I'd say it's a jackpot. The Shroud of Graceful Dusk was an incredible memory indeed. Its value was only increased by the fact that all but the last of its enchantments were passive. A rare case for memories of the higher ranks. The silk garment would enhance Sonny's thinking and passive essence regeneration, as well as make him tire less and recover from fatigue faster. He would also be able to communicate with other people, or maybe even creatures, telepathically, which was an incredibly valuable ability. If there was one thing about the Graceless Dusk that made Sonny feel a bit regretful, it was that it did not seem to be oriented toward battle, and instead gifted the wearer with great utility outside of it. That was not too strange, since there were a lot of armor-type memories like that. Still, a transcendent one, even if it was made of fabric instead of steel, would not be too shabby. And he was already thinking about how to use the Blessing of Dusk to cause savage mental shock to people. Sonny had plenty of harrowing experiences to share through a mental link. As he thought about that, the temperature of the ocean surrounding him subtly changed. Looking up, Sonny could see dim lights through the mass of water. They were approaching the surface. Sonny crawled onto the shore and lay on the cold stones of the pebble beach for a bit, breathing heavily. It was incredibly nice to lay on solid ground again, but at the same time, his body felt heavy. A part of it had to do with spending some time in the depths of the ocean, and a part of it was simply because he was still tired and low on essence. Curse it. He had enough sense left at least to let one shadow slide off his body and take a look around to make sure that there were no enemies in his immediate vicinity. There were none, at least not close by. There was only Neve, who seemed to be doing a little bit better than Sonny. The Night Walker took a few deep breaths, then slowly sat up. We actually made it. Gods, I really did not expect to live through this one. He glanced at Sonny, receiving a vague gesture of confirmation. Sonny shared the feeling. Neve grasped his shoulder for a moment, then asked with a hint of morbid curiosity in his voice, How did you manage to kill that horror anyway? Such a devastating mental attack. Even Uncle failed to resist it. Sonny remained motionless for a few seconds, pushed himself off the ground with a tired groan, and glanced at the Scion of Night somberly. Spitting out the essence pearl, he then grimaced and said, I guess it was just fate. That fiend was fated to die by my hand, and so fate helped me kill it." Neve smiled weakly, then looked away. "Never took you for a fatalist." That was when a third figure rose from the water. Bloodwave walked onto the shore, his eyes glinting with shades of deep blue and indigo. Drops of water were rolling down his smooth ebony skin, contours of steel muscles clearly visible under it. The saint remained silent for a few moments, looking into the distance. Then he sighed and suddenly disappeared. A strong gale threw a scattering of pebbles into the air, making Sunny cover his face with his hand. "What is that speed?" He lowered his hand and looked in the direction where Bloodwave had dashed. Slowly, his face grew still. "No." Neve's voice sounded defeated. The shore around them was empty. Here and there a few dead nightmare creatures lay on the ground, their blood steaming in the cold. Snowflakes were dancing in the air as they fell from the empty sky. There were no brood beasts in sight, and the roar of the distant cannonade was much quieter than it had been when they left. All good signs. However, the illusion of peace was destroyed when one saw the port fortress that loomed some distance away. A large section of its wall was torn asunder and collapsed, and most of the lights that had illuminated the battlements were now dark. There was movement in the breach, silhouettes who looked like people walking between the rubble with unsteady steps. Beyond that, Sunny could see nothing else. Remembering the sight of the vast crowd of frightened refugees cowering in the courtyard, he felt his heart turn cold. The battle was over at least. Otherwise, Bloodwave would have already been rampaging among the remaining abomination. The ships anchored near the fortress were intact as well. Whatever damage had been done to the port did not reach them. Sunny stood up with a stagger, then dismissed the essence pearl and the nimble catch. Black threads surrounded his body, soon turning into the gray fabric of the puppeteer's shroud. Glancing at the crestfallen Nightwalker, he said evenly, "I think you should take a look at—" "Let's go." The two of them slowly made their way to the fortress. As they approached, more details became visible. The bodies of the thralls littered the ground, mangled and torn apart. There were many more of them here than there had been protecting the Terror, thousands of them, all slain despite their dreadful power. It seemed that the defenders of the fort had not surrendered even a single meter of the approach without making the abominations pay a steep price. Sunny saw nightmare creatures of all kinds among the felled thralls, some of them large enough to make him shiver. There were human bodies among them as well, the former residents of LO-49, who had finally found their final resting place, thousands of kilometers away from the distant research base. Perhaps they would have been glad to lay on solid ground again as well, instead of floating endlessly in the lightless abyss of the ocean. When Sunny and Neve walked closer to the breached wall of the fortress, they saw the bodies of the First Army soldiers among the dead thralls too. Mundane humans, awakened. There were too many of them to count. Sunny felt a bitter feeling grasp his heart. This was a part of his victory as well. He had been proud, gleeful, and elated after killing the hateful, corrupted Terror. Happy to receive a powerful memory, however, his victory was made possible because most of the creature's drowned guard had been drawn away by the defenders of the port. While Sunny was fighting Sybil in the depths of the ocean, these men and women were dying here on the shore to give them a fighting chance. That did not diminish his accomplishment. However, it did put it in perspective, cruelly so. Suddenly, Sunny remembered something Master Jet had told him once, years ago, while driving him to the gates of the academy. No one can survive in the dream realm alone. The waking world's no different from the dream realm these days, is it? Maybe it never had been. Passing between the soldiers that were walking among the bodies, recovering the dead humans, and hopelessly searching for wounded survivors, Sunny climbed the rubble to enter the breach and looked at the courtyard of the fortress that was revealed behind it. The refugees were alive, pressed against the opposite wall of the yard, and pale with terror. There was a light barricade built to shield them from any potential enemy, with soldiers vigilantly standing guard behind it. The battle seemed to have been the most fearsome, just beyond the breach. An actual mountain of corpses was piled up where the defenders had made a desperate last stand, refusing to let the thralls reach the civilians. Sonny descended into the courtyard and looked around forlornly. He found Vern's body soon. The enthralled master was laying on his back, staring at the sky with empty, glassy eyes. His ribcage, shoulder, and skull were crushed by some devastating blunt weapon. He was finally, and mercifully, truly dead. Dale was laying nearby too. Sonny almost failed to recognize the irregular captain without his bulky armor. The memories, of course, had disappeared after the owner's death, and because the body was terribly mangled. However, the insignia of an ascendant of the First Army could still be discerned on the bloodied sleeve of his bodysuit. Gritting his teeth, Sonny took a few steps forward and kneeled near the mangled body. He did not really know what to do. The wind was picking up, making him shiver. Sonny remained silent for a while, and then said quietly, "You rest well now, Master Dale. You did well. Your nightmare is over." The second week of the siege was over. A few days ago, the devouring cloud had been eliminated. The terror of LO-49 had been slain on the same day as well. More people had been evacuated. More people were being evacuated still. The siege capital still stood, firmly in human hands and mostly unbroken. Sonny was in a familiar office in the underground government complex, the same one where he had met the rest of the irregular officers before the siege started. The office was much the same, with only the image projected on the false window changed. It was still showing the view of the city, only now there were fewer people on the streets. The blizzard was picking up again too, so the visibility wasn't great. There was also one more vacant chair. There were currently only 3 people inside: Sonny, Jet, and Winter. The 3 of them were not enough for the large room, so it felt painfully empty. Winter's eyes were hidden behind her sunglasses. This was the first time Sonny saw her after the day of the battle with the devouring cloud. He hesitated for a while, then forced himself to say, "Dale, he was a good man." She turned her head slightly and stared at him for a while. Probably. Sonny could not really see where she was looking. Eventually, Winter sighed and briefly touched her forearm, where an edge of a tattoo could be seen peeking out from beneath the rolled sleeve of her bodysuit. "It's all right. I knew that the fool was going to get himself killed eventually. There were 6 of us at the start, you know." She grew quiet for a bit, then shook her head. "Back at the academy. Then there were only 2 of us left after the second nightmare. And now there's just me. I'll probably be dead soon too. No regrets though, as long as it's for a good cause." Her voice sounded as laid back as usual, but Sonny could sense a bit of strain in it. "I'm sorry." Winter smiled. "If you're really sorry, little devil, make sure to stay alive. You're too young and cute to die. Reaper, you too. You too try to stay alive. Not that you're young and cute." Master Jet laughed. "Well, if you insist, I have to give it a try. Might be problematic, though." They remained silent for a few moments, enjoying the relaxed atmosphere. All 3 had been fighting with very little rest in between combat shifts for the past few days, so this meeting was a bit of a reprieve if nothing else. Soul Reaper sighed and glanced at her datapad. "I'll update you on the current state of things. Most of the information has been sent to your communicators, so take a look at it later. The important stuff is the wall is still holding, but just barely. 3 breaches have turned into 5, as you must know. Army Command expects that we won't lose control of the defensive barrier unless something catastrophic happens, though." Winter raised a hand, interrupting her. "What's the point of talking about it? Let's just get to the actual business. The priority targets. Hey, 2 out of 5 are dealt with. Sunny killed the Terror, while the Brood Mommy and Brood Daddy of the Devouring Cloud were done in by you, Sunny, and Mongrel. That's great news. What about the other three, though? Master Jet lingered for a bit. Actually, that's why I called you in today. The Heart of Darkness seems to have disappeared, so we don't have to worry about it yet. Maybe that thing won't reach Falcon Scott before we retreat. Goliath, on the other hand, was supposed to show up yesterday. He's been moving very slowly recently, however, for whatever reason. So the time window changed. We should expect the big bastard to arrive tomorrow, or the day after that. An uncomfortable silence settled in the underground office. Winter broke it by whistling. Speaking of something catastrophic happening, huh? Are you sure we can handle a Titan? Soul Reaper lingered for a while. Don't fret. Sunny and I will handle him. Saint Bloodwave agreed to come out of the water to assist too, if we need him. He's not as powerful on land, but a transcendent is a transcendent. Overall, it seems like the situation is not entirely hopeless. The First Army has suffered heavy casualties in the past 2 weeks, true, but no more than Army Command expected. The evacuation is also only a little bit behind schedule. I'd say that as long as Tyrus continues to keep the Winter Beast at bay, we have a real chance of pulling this off. Sunny shifted in his seat. How is she doing anyway? Master Jet gave him a long look and thought before answering. Her voice was a bit wistful. Well, Skytide is doing fine. Whitefeather lost a lot of people during the battle with the Devouring Cloud, but her husband and immediate family survived. Roan will be out of commission for a couple more weeks, sadly. Coincidentally, the House of Night lost many awakened on the same day as well. The forces of the great clans here are diminished, but they still pack a bite. Their heavy hitters are all alive. Sunny let out a sigh of relief. He had been somewhat worried about St. Tyrus and Master Roan. It was good to hear that both of them were fine. Soul Reaper yawned, then put her datapad on the table and gave him a poignant look. Back to Goliath, though. How is that project of yours coming along? He stared at her for a moment or two. That depends. Have you gotten those memories I requested? Jet winced. No, there are a lot of sleepers that need to be armed, and a lot of memories being lost every shift with people carrying them dying before having a chance to transfer anything. I'll be able to receive a few in a couple of days, but we probably won't have that long. Sunny sighed, then gave her a bitter smile. That's fine. The project is all but finished. I have a few spare memories as an emergency replacement. It's just that I would have preferred not to waste them. Winter gave them both a curious look. Are you two talking in code? What project? What memories? You guys are not trying to buy a boat on the black market and sail into the sunset together, are you? Soul Reaper grinned. Just a little something Sunny has cooked up in that devious head of his to solve our Titan problem. I'll tell you if we have some free time today. She glanced at the clock, the smile disappearing from her face. That said, you should go get it, Sunny. Don't linger. Army Command has been known to make wrong estimations before. He nodded, then stood up and spared the two women one last glance. They were probably not going to see each other again until Goliath showed up, and maybe never again after. He remained silent for a moment, then smiled. We don't need to buy a boat on the black market, by the way. My Rhino is a fully amphibious vehicle, so it can take us over the strait no problem, as long as nothing swallows it on the way, of course. Anyway, if something happens, you are both invited, so... With that, he winked and hurriedly left the office. Once Sunny was outside, however, his smile disappeared and was replaced by an expression of focused concentration. This is it then. No more time to waste. Sunny followed the network of underground tunnels to reach the barracks and then emerged from them near where the Rhino was parked. Breathing in the cold air, he spent a moment enjoying the lack of desire to cough. The strange trauma he had received after touching the Nightmare Gate was all but gone now, and walked forward through the darkness. Snow was crunching under his feet. Weird. Is it a good sign or a bad sign? The city's street illumination often went awry because of the numerous gates outside and within the wall. Usually, army technicians and civilian personnel would fix and replace the damaged components promptly, but this section was barely lit. No one seemed to have cleaned the snow in a while either. Had the state of the city deteriorated to the point where no one bothered with these things anymore? Or was it simply the result of so many people having already been evacuated? By now, only about a third of the initial 200 million remained trapped in Falcon Scott. Maybe the person assigned to maintain this small corner of the city was already safely across the strait, with no one to replace them. Perhaps it was both. Glancing at the dark sky, Sonny rubbed his face and walked toward the Rhino. The last few days had been hectic. By all accounts, he should have been dead tired and on the verge of collapsing from sleep deprivation. However, Sonny felt fine. In fact, he felt rather great. His body was full of vigor and vitality, while his mind was fresh and focused. The reason, of course, was the shroud of graceless dusk. He glanced down, studying the transcendent memory. The graceless dusk looked like a simple tunic of fine, soft silk. He had expected it to be white, but to his surprise, the tunic turned out to be of a rich and beautiful black color, with intricate patterns embroidered along its collar, hem, and sleeve edges with silver thread. The hem reached just below his knees, while the sleeves ended at his elbows. The tunic was tied at the waist by an unadorned cord of black silk, and came with a pair of dainty shoes, made of the same fabric, with a soft sole that was more suited for a well-tended garden than wilderness. Sonny enjoyed the fact that it allowed him to move around without making the slightest noise. The shoes only looked dainty, too. The black silk that the tunic and the shoes were made of was light and soft, but more durable than tempered steel. Sonny had tested how impervious it was exactly, and was surprised to find out that the cruel sight could not pierce the thin fabric, no matter how hard he tried. It did not burn, get wet, dissolve in acid, or suffer damage from any other elemental attacks he had at his disposal. Only the Sin of Solace managed to cut the black silk, and even then, with a lot of trouble. This was not to say that the graceless dusk could serve as a good suit of combat armor. The tunic itself left his forearms, shins, head, and neck exposed, while the soft shoes only covered his feet and ankles. Worse than that, neither was rigid. While the black silk was very hard to pierce, it did nothing to stop blunt attacks and concussive trauma. The marble shell could deal with that to some extent, but it was still not an ideal situation. However, Sonny was not concerned. The graceless dusk did not make any noise and was extremely light, not constraining his movements at all. More importantly, the other benefits of the transcendent garment far outweighed its lackluster defense. The 4 blessings were a great boon, as well as the reason why he felt so invigorated, despite the recent lack of rest and sleep. The blessing of flesh and the blessing of spirit made him tire much slower, both mentally and physically, while the time he needed to recover from fatigue was drastically cut. In the days after the battle with the devouring cloud, Sonny had only slept for a couple of hours at best, and yet he felt very refreshed and energized. The blessing of soul, meanwhile, boosted the rate at which his essence regenerated. That was an awfully pleasant and valuable benefit, especially here in Antarctica. Finally, there was the blessing of mind, which was the strangest, but also the most powerful. The enchantment did not exactly make him smarter or more insightful, but it did make his mind more productive. It was as though there were several compartments within his head now, each capable of running a separate task concurrently, as long as it was not too demanding. That made simple calculations and analyzing clear information easier and faster. The effect was not new to Sonny, Since he had been doing more or less the same thing for a long time to control his shadows, he was long used to perceiving and comprehending the world from several different viewpoints, which all but required him to sort of split his consciousness into several streams. However, after doing some research, due to the graceless dusk, he discovered that most people found such a task to be hard, or even impossible. In any case, his already deviant ability to partition his mind and multitask was boosted even further by the blessing of the mind. Needless to say, all of that was extremely useful when applied to weaving. With his mental capacity increased and his essence regenerating at a much faster rate, Sunny had finally been able to crack the case and turn the Devil's Needle into a memory. He was not sure that he would have been able to achieve quite the same result without the boost provided by the 4 blessings. There was the 5th blessing too, the Blessing of Dusk. This active enchantment was a very insidious one. It allowed Sunny to establish a telepathic connection with another person, or even several, to communicate with them through words and other more crude means of sharing information, such as emotions and vague images. Sadly, he could not simply read their minds, since the communications had to be intentional. That said, the recipients of the link were also unable to refuse it. If Sunny wanted, he could bombard them with the most gruesome and loud thoughts, causing something akin to a mental shock. Those with weaker minds were outright stunned, while those with resilience and discipline were at least found to be disoriented. Of course, the first person Sunny had tried to communicate with telepathically was Saint. To his disappointment, the Blessing of Dusk did not work on her at all, probably due to the Shadow's immunity to mind attacks. He still did not know what was going on in that beautiful onyx head of hers. Entering the dark interior of the Rhino, Sunny called the taciturn knight forth. She stepped out of his shadow, the plume of her helmet brushing against the vehicle's roof. Suddenly, the massive APC seemed cramped and narrow. Looking up at his loyal devil, Sunny smiled. "Are you hungry? How about a late-night snack?" The graceful knight stared at him indifferently, not showing any reaction. The ruby jewels of her eyes glowed with menacing crimson flames, revealing no emotion. Sunny sighed. "Oh, come on. Don't you understand what is happening? Just emote, please. It won't kill you, I think." Saint remained silent and as aloof as ever, causing his heart to ache. Cursing her under his breath, Sunny looked away and summoned the runes. The shimmering symbols appeared in the air in front of him. Name, Sunless. True name, Lost from Light. Rank, Ascended. Class, Devil. Shadow Cores, 4 out of 7. Shadow Fragments, 2,973 out of 4,000. Memories, Silver Bell, Puppeteer's Shroud, Midnight Shard, Extraordinary Rock, Prowling Thorn, Endless Spring, Darkwing, Moonlight Shard, Weaver's Mask, Broken Oath, Autumn Leaf, Cruel Sight, Covetous Coffer, Heavenly Burden, Memory of Fire, Memory of Ice, Strike of Thunder, Morgan's Warbow, Shadow Lantern, Bone Singer, Shadow Chair, Overpriced Saddle, Dying Wish, Sin of Solace, Bitter Cusp, Stifled Scream, Weaver's Needle, Essence Pearl, Nimble Catch, Shroud of Graceless Dusk, Siege Souvenir, Incessant Seeker. His shadow fragments were already closing in on 3,000. That was not the important part, though. Sunny studied the list of his memories with a pained expression, then looked down and concentrated on Saint's name. Shadow, Onyx Saint. Shadow Fragments, 196 out of 200. He was so close. She was only 3.5 fragments away from saturating the counter. Sadly, there was no time to hunt for memories anymore. There was no time for Saint to slowly recover in his core in case she got wounded either, which was why he had not sent her to defend the wall in the last couple of days. Sonny could have gone and begged for a few memories from people he knew, but there was no need. He had been prepared to fail to reach his goal on time. All it meant was that he had to sacrifice several memories of his own. The problem was that he cherished all of his memories. They were all useful in their way. Some were integral to his battle prowess. Some were a form of insurance for unexpected situations. The Dark Wing and the Heavenly Burden, for example, were far from stellar memories. However, he needed them in case there was no way to avoid an aerial fight. Other memories possessed useful enchantments that he wanted to replicate one day. Some memories Sonny had outgrown, but was attached to them sentimentally. More than that, he hoped to pass them on to Rain should she become a sleeper. There was only one useless memory in his arsenal, the Silver Bell. However, Sonny was reluctant to sacrifice it. That was the first memory he had ever obtained, and the first memory he had changed with sorcery. It was also a memento that reminded him of happier times. It's just a dormant memory of the second tier, too. Consuming it won't satiate Saint at all. Nevertheless, he had to sacrifice something. In the end, Sonny sighed bitterly and summoned 3 memories. A heavy kunai, a glistening gem made of polished red coral, and an arrow with green fletching appeared in front of him. The last one was the Incessant Seeker, an ascended arrow of the second tier he had received recently. It was as powerful as the Strike of Thunder, but possessed enchantments that guided it toward a single target and enhanced the damage dealt to the sole enemy, which was a real boon. However, Sonny had many other ways to deal high damage to a single target. The second memory was the Broken Oath. As always, Sonny winced when its soul-eroding aura started slowly dissolving his soul. It was a great charm that had served him well many times in the past and synergized perfectly with Saint's immunity to soul attacks. Its power as an awakened memory of the first tier was not great, though. With the caliber of enemies Sonny was facing these days, it was like a drop in the ocean. Aside from that, Saint was mostly fighting alongside Nightmare now, and would hopefully be surrounded by more shadows in the future. The others did not possess the same immunity, which limited the usefulness of the red gem. The first memory Sonny summoned was the Prowling Thorn. He sighed again, looking at the kunai with regret. There was nothing wrong with the throwing dagger, and they had gone through a lot together, but it had outlived its usefulness. Sonny would have preferred to keep the Prowling Thorn simply for utility, but the situation demanded he let go of something. Sonny had already lost the Patient Avenger, and now he was going to lose 3 more perfectly fine memories. He felt as if his heart was bleeding. Waste. Such a waste. He closed his eyes and then handed the dagger, the gem, and the arrow to Saint without looking. Here, you eat these. Enjoy your meal. The graceful Onyx Knight silently took the memories and crushed them in her fists without pausing even for a moment. Hearing the dreadful sound, Sonny was stunned. She didn't even hesitate. Those were very precious. Damn it. Opening his eyes, he saw 4 streams of radiant sparks being absorbed into the shadow's body. Then, her eyes flashed with dark glee. The rune still hung in the air, the counter showing shadow fragments, 200 out of 200. In the next moment, the shadow that existed where Saint's soul should have been suddenly rippled. The 4 dark embers in its depths shone with lightless radiance, and wisps of black flames rose from her armor. Sonny took a step back, mesmerized by the familiar scene. He had already seen it once, back when his taciturn knight ascended. In the next moment, Saint's figure was enveloped entirely by the black flames, making it impossible to see her. A powerful gust of wind blew through the interior of the rhino, both unbearable heat and chilling coldness assaulting Sonny at the same time. He blinked. Crap. Maybe I should have done this in the Soul Sea. But there was nothing he could do now but wait. Nervous for his expensive APC, Sonny summoned a barrier of shadows to surround Saint. A minute passed in tense silence. Then two. Then, something exploded within the barrier, shattering it easily and sending Sonny flying back. A wave of darkness rolled through the Rhino, turning its interior into a mess and cracking its armored windows from within. The enormous vehicle shook and trembled, then grew still, with a loud groan. Sonny scrambled back to his feet and stared at Saint, who was standing in the same spot, seemingly unchanged. However, the darkness dwelling within her was now much deeper and more frightening. Her onyx body radiated a sense of vast, dreadful power, and the menacing crimson flames dancing in her ruby eyes was brighter. His shadow, now a transcendent devil, tilted her head slightly, looking at him with her usual indifference. But Sonny could feel a hint of emotion behind it. Pride? Satisfaction? Gratitude? Slowly, a wide grin appeared on his face. Sonny brushed the graceless dusk, straightened, and looked at the menacing devil with a smile. Should I start calling you Saint now? Huh? His shadow was a transcendent now. Sonny found it hard to believe, even though he had been the one who made her transcendence possible. It was just that saints held a special place in human culture. They were the epitome of vast and unobtainable power. They were more demigods than people, enigmatic and awe-inspiring, so distant as to almost be ineffable. He was now a master himself, and on top of that, one of the strongest there was. But even still, a huge gap separated Sonny from someone like Skytide or Bloodwave, which he did not dare test. Of course, it was unclear where the Onyx Knight was truly equal to the mighty saints of the human race. In terms of purely physical prowess, she was at least on par with them, and most likely far superior. Her skill was outstanding, as were her talent and willpower after all. Saint had always been outstanding. She often triumphed over adversaries who were much more powerful than her. But so were human transcendents. There was no such thing as an average saint. Every one of them was the absolute best of the human race, battle-hardened warriors of utmost talent, resolve, and ability, with thousands upon thousands of bloody fights under their belt. There was also one fundamental difference between humans and creatures such as his shadow. Humans possessed aspects, while creatures did not. Saint had just gained her powers, wielding elemental darkness to strengthen her body and her weapons. However, every human transcendent wielded a powerful aspect and was armed with several potent abilities, including the transformation. They were also all carriers of the Nightmare spell. Simply put, Sonny did not know who would end up victorious if Saint fought a human transcendent. He had a feeling that, by herself, the Onyx Knight would lose. However, if she was augmented by his shadows, the result might be very different. Luckily, he had no intention of combating saints anytime soon. Dismissing the shadow, Sonny sighed and spent some time cleaning up the mess her transcendence had made of the interior of the Rhino. The APC was in a sorry state, but still functional. See, the day is only getting better and better, he thought to himself. Or was it night? Here in Antarctica, it was always night, so sticking to the old notion of time was getting harder and harder. He made himself a late supper, or an early breakfast, and settled in the lounge area for a few minutes. After a while, his communicator made a familiar sound. It seemed that the Siege Capital's communication array had activated, as it usually did twice a day, sending packets of data to those with bandwidth quota. Sunny looked at the new message with some relief. Rain was doing fine, it seemed. Her response was shorter than usual, but she was not experiencing any symptoms of being infected by the spell. He had always been worried about his sister, and after observing so many mundanes being killed by the first nightmare here in Antarctica, and having killed many monstrous abominations their bodies had turned into, that worry only grew stronger. Sunny sighed.
Oh, she's okay. She's safe. There's no reason for her to contract the spell to begin with, and even if she does, Serpent is with her.
Sunny missed his serpentine shadow. It would have been tremendously useful during the Southern Quadrant campaign, considering how dire his need for essence had been from day one in this cold hell, not to mention the versatile and powerful nature of Serpent's abilities. And yet, Sunny had not regretted leaving it with Rain even once. Her safety took precedence, and, well, obviously, that's kind of a given. He had many other ways of protecting himself. If anything, experiencing the bitter hardships of the Antarctica campaign without the Serpent had allowed him to learn how to manage his essence with utmost efficiency, as well as vastly improve his control over it. Thinking of his shadows, Sunny suddenly felt curious about their relationship with his class. Even though the Soul Serpent was currently away, each of the shadows occupied one of his cores. Did it mean that he was only ever able to control 7 of them at most? If that were the case, maybe the dismal rate at which he received echoes was not such a terrible thing. He might have been very upset if someone like Kurt, the awakened psychopath he had killed in the waking world, prevented him from turning Nightmare into one of his shadows. That time, his dislike of the man, and of the idea of owning human echoes, had prevented Sunny from wasting fragments on the transformation. But he would have caved in if given a better opportunity. Or, wait, would he have even been able to make Kurt into a shadow without losing Saint or Serpent? He was just an awakened monster back then, possessing only 2 shadow cores.
I'm rambling.
Sunny remained motionless for a few moments, staring into the distance. He was thinking about unnecessary things to distract himself from what was about to come. Goliath was approaching, the creature that had almost killed him once. The fallen Titan had already destroyed one siege capital, so there was a real chance that Falcon Scott would be destroyed by the abominable giant as well. Sunny and Jet were determined to slay the gargantuan creature of stone, but anything could happen. Even if their preparations worked, there was no telling what damage would be done to the city wall before the Titan perished. If he perished. This day might turn out to be the last day for many, many people. Maybe even Sunny himself. He closed his eyes for a moment. His response to Rain did not contain any of the grave worries that gnawed at him. Even though she was smart enough to read between the lines, Sunny made an effort to hide the ugly truth as well as he could. That was for his benefit too. While writing messages to Rain, Sunny was almost able to believe in his lies. Not knowing the truth was a solace. Sometime later, the members of his cohort approached the Rhino. Belle, Dorn, Samara, Kimmy, and Luster walking inside. They froze for a moment, studying the upturned interior of the APC and the cracks in its armored windows with stunned expressions. After a while, Luster cleared his throat.
Sir? What happened?
Sunny gave him a deadpan look.
I had a lady over. She transcended.
The young man laughed nervously.
Good one, sir.
After that, he practically ran to the pilot's cabin to check on the internal systems of the Rhino. As Luster went through the diagnostics, he kept mumbling under his nose.
Gods, did he crash into a Titan? This damage, oh, my poor baby.
Sunny shook his head and addressed the rest of his soldiers, speaking loudly enough for Luster to hear as well.
Prepare yourselves. Army Command is certain that Goliath will reach the city either today or tomorrow. In any case, we won't be leaving the wall until he does. This is going to be the big one, guys.
His soldiers grew somber, their eyes full of calm determination. Sunny nodded.
Don't worry about the Titan himself. Colonel Jet and I will take care of the big bastard. However, Goliath is not going to show up alone, and judging by how Erebus Field fell, there is a big chance that the wall will be breached. I don't need to tell you how important it is to prevent the nightmare creatures from getting inside. However, if the situation becomes hopeless, be ready to retreat to the secondary line of defense within the city.
He paused for a moment, looking at them with a serious expression.
Don't be stupid and die an unnecessary death. I need you alive to fight tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow, and the day after that. Dying might as well be considered desertion at this point. No one is allowed to die without my permission, understood?
The members of his cohort grinned, then saluted.
Yes, sir. Wouldn't think of it.
I'm scared of you way more than I'm scared of death, sir. I wouldn't dare.
Sonny blinked a couple of times at that last one, then nodded.
That's great. Let's go then.
Soon, the Rhino started and moved forward with some effort. They drove across Falcon Scott, where a lot of streets were now empty, and a lot were unlit. Snow piled high in some areas, and in others, crowds of refugees were anxiously hurrying through the cold. Luster was stubbornly sticking to only the well-illuminated roads, for some reason, which made the progress a bit slow. The wall steadily grew closer and closer. Before they reached the secondary defense ring, however, Sonny suddenly ordered him to stop the APC. The young man looked back with a silent question. Sonny hesitated for a few moments, then said,
"Wait for me here. I won't be long."
With that, he left the Rhino and walked toward a familiar dormitory tower, which happened to be nearby. No one was cleaning the snow in front of its entrance this time. Sonny stood there for a minute or two, staring at the flimsy doors with a grim expression. Eventually, he sighed.
Even if the whole city is destroyed, this damn dormitory must remain standing. I'll make sure of it.
With that, he turned around and started walking away. When he did, however, he almost stumbled into someone approaching the dormitory.
Watch where you're going, idiot. Huh? Sonny?
He sighed and looked up, noticing Beth and Professor Obel. They must have been returning from their shifts. Beth at the volunteer center, the old man at the engineering wing of the government complex. The young woman blinked a couple of times, staring at him with surprise. Before Sonny could come up with something to say, she asked,
"Aren't you cold?"
He opened his mouth, then looked down at the thin silk tunic covering his body. Indeed, it did not look exactly like something a person should be wearing in the middle of winter. Sonny cleared his throat.
I'm not, elemental resistance, you know.
Beth scoffed.
You're still a human, are you not? Put something warm on for spell's sake. I imagine fighting on the wall with a running nose is not a great idea. Ascended snot is still snot.
He looked at her silently for a few moments, then suddenly laughed.
Yes, I am still a human. That's true. Thanks. I'll try to remember that.
Professor Obel took a step forward, smiling.
Were you on your way to visit us, Major Sunless? Come, there's no point in standing here in the cold.
Sonny smiled, then lightly shook his head.
No, I was actually on my way to start the shift on the wall. Army Command is expecting a big fight, so it's all hands on deck. Well, even more so than usual. In any case, make sure to remain inside, and be careful in the next day or so. Things might get a little hectic.
The old man nodded with a sigh.
I see. Well, we won't keep you then. Please, stay safe.
He moved forward, but then paused and patted Sonny on the shoulder.
Maybe you'll stop by after your shift then. It's nothing much, but Beth received a bit of extra rations today. We are planning to cook up a feast for everyone who is still waiting for a ticket in our block. I will save you a portion.
Sonny remained silent for one moment too long, then shrugged.
Why not? It's a promise.
He watched Professor Opal and Beth disappear inside, then slowly turned around and walked back toward the rhino. As he walked, the smile disappeared from his face, replaced by a dark, ruthless expression. Deep shadows nestled in his eyes. It's time to kill a Titan. What happened at Erebus Field could not be allowed to repeat itself. Goliath had to die, and Sonny was just the person to kill him. An eye for an eye, a death for a death. Sonny was a very petty and vindictive person, and the two of them had a score to settle. The winds were howling as they crashed into the colossal bulwark of the city wall. The soldiers of the First Army were shivering on the battlements, staring into the hazy mist of the blizzard with grim expressions. These were the lucky ones. The less fortunate were far below, on the ground, ready to defend the breaches with their lives. Because of the ugly rifts in the defensive barrier of the city, the logistics of the siege had to become much harder. Today, it was especially so, since no one knew the direction from which the Titan was going to attack. Goliath could come from the south, marching across the ravaged landscape and shaking the earth with his every step. He could come from the north, emerging from below the dark waves to attack the port fortress first. For all Army Command knew, he could even crawl from under the ground. The scope of the Titan's abilities was still a mystery. That was why the defenders were dispersed along the whole perimeter of the wall instead of congregating at one or several of its sections. However, Sonny and Jet, as well as their two cohorts of irregulars, had found themselves in a familiar spot, right above the main entrance of the siege capital, not too far away from where the Nightmare Gate had torn through the wall not too long ago. Sonny was sitting with his back against the alloy parapet, meditating. Soul Reaper was standing nearby, looking across the vast killing field, the landscape obscured by the veil of snow. Both were trying to ignore the whispers of the call. It was more than a bit annoying to have to deal with it, on top of the sickening anxiety of waiting for the start of the battle. Sonny sighed, then looked up at Master Jet. His hair was getting in the way, so he brushed it aside. Before he could speak, she suddenly asked, "Why don't you cut it?" He coughed in embarrassment. The thing is, mundane scissors and barbers stopped working on me. I should probably just use a sharp memory and cut it myself. Yeah, that's what I'll do one of these days. Jet looked away with a smile. I know a guy back in NQSC. He's very in demand as one of the few awakened hairstylists around. There are many saints among his clientele, but if you want, I can get you a recommendation. Sonny laughed. Sure, when we're back in NQSC. He remained silent for a few moments, then asked, How sure are you that we'll be able to destroy Goliath? The Soul Reaper hesitated. As long as you pull off your part of the plan. Pretty sure. Bloodwave will step in if something goes wrong, too. It's a shame that Skytide is away fighting the Winter Beast again, but we should be all right without her. Sonny nodded. I think so. However, Jet interrupted him by raising a hand. He grew quiet and raised an eyebrow. She looked into the darkness with a calm expression. Listen. Sonny did so, hearing nothing but the wind and the stifled breaths of the thousands of soldiers surrounding them. Then, a muffled sound reached his ears from somewhere far away. And then, after a long and arduous pause, again. Sonny stood up, staring into the blizzard. Suddenly, he felt a chill creeping up his spine. He's coming. From a vast distance, the thunderous steps of the colossal giant were rolling over the world. Even though the soldiers could not see anything because of the raging snowstorm, The sound alone made them pale and grasp their weapons with trembling hands. Each one assaulted them, almost like a mental attack. Jet tried to contact Army Command, then cursed when the interference made it impossible. Calling out one of the messengers, she said tersely, "Inform the HQ that Goliath is approaching from the south. We need reinforcements here as soon as possible. Go." The pale-faced messenger saluted and disappeared from view, and then there was nothing for them to do but wait. By Sonny's side, the members of his cohort were preparing for battle. Everyone around was doing the same, and from the impenetrable white haze beyond the wall, the steps of the giant continued to boom, slowly growing louder and closer, and much more frightening. And then, after a torturous span of silence, again. Sonny gritted his teeth, and on the battlement behind him, 4 shadows shivered. Hidden in the blizzard, Goliath was slowly approaching Falcon Scott. No one could see him, but the heavy steps of the Titan sounded like foreboding war drums. Soon, the ground started shaking with each of them. The tremors traveled through the alloy structure of the city wall, making it vibrate. Sonny felt his body grow stiff, as if paralyzed by the memory of being crushed and broken by the giant's foot. Humans could not really recall pain, but remembering the feeling of being hurt was very easy, especially if one was hurt terribly. He had almost died that day. He should have died, if not for a couple of memories and a bit of luck. His body remembered being destroyed. Snarling, Sonny shook off the paralyzing fear and peered into the blizzard, hoping to see the hateful shape of the walking mountain. Instead, he just heard the echoes. Suddenly, the thunderous steps stopped. A moment later, a rift appeared in the wall of the blizzard, and for a few moments, he could see far and wide. Sonny's eyes narrowed. Out there, at the edge of the killing field, a giant creature stood in front of the mountains. Taller than the city wall by far, the Titan looked like a mountain himself. His vaguely humanoid body was broad and misshapen, made of uneven weathered stone. He had 3 mighty arms and 1 enormous eye that stared at the soldiers of the First Army with an alien, cold, terrifying malice. The milky eye was completely white, having no iris and no pupil. Behind and around the Titan, a vast and dark sea of bodies was undulating as it flowed down from the slopes of the mountains. Nightmare creatures, a stunningly large horde of them, were following the fallen Titan. For a moment, the world seemed frozen. In that dreadful instant, Sonny forced himself to smile. All of it, him coming to Antarctica, marching with the First Army across its cold expanse, surviving LO-49, clawing his way back north with a train of refugees, the long weeks of fighting at Falcon Scott, had been for this moment. He looked at Goliath with murderous intensity.
"Come here, bastard."
In the next moment, as if answering his call, the giant stepped forward. As soon as Goliath took a step forward, and the wall vibrated under Sonny once again, he called upon Saint. By his side, Master Jet mounted the parapet of the battlement, clinging to it with one hand and ready to push herself away. In her other hand, the slender glaive weaved itself from snowflakes. The sea of nightmare creatures flowed forward, overtaking the marching Colossus. The familiar thunder of discharging railguns tore the snowstorm apart, and the turrets joined them a moment later, drowning the world in a roaring cacophony. A tall and graceful figure clad in onyx armor stepped onto the wall from the shadows. Instantly, her fearsome presence permeated the air, making soldiers turn around and crane their necks, staring at the menacing Black Knight in fright. Saint's ruby eyes flashed with cold crimson flames. Someone yelled,
It's Mongrel!
"Mongrel is here?"
Thank the gods!
Their calls rolled across the wall, and the soldiers who had been shaken by the terrible visage of the marching Titan regained some of their confidence. Even though Saint was dwarfed by the looming shapes of bulky MWPs, at that moment, she seemed much greater than the towering machines.
Show that ugly boulder who's in charge, Mongrel!
As for Sonny, no one paid him much attention. Whatever fame he had earned among the fighters of the First Army paled in comparison to his flamboyant alter ego. After all, unlike him, Mongrel was a mysterious character. People were free to fill in the blanks using nothing but their imaginations. And the things they came up with were always much more fantastical than the truth. Well, at least the version of the truth about Sonny that he shared with the world. The actual truth was so outlandish that no one would probably believe it.
Doesn't matter.
Watching Goliath walk forward, Sonny summoned a very special memory. The one he had worked so hard to create. His payback gift to the stone giant. The Siege Souvenir. Suddenly, a very lengthy and sharp javelin appeared in Saint's hand. It was about 3 meters long, incredibly heavy, and entirely white. A sense of immense, wild, destructive power radiated from the white javelin, making even Sonny himself feel slightly uncomfortable. Of course, the javelin was the quill of the corrupted devil he had collected from an army warehouse a long time ago. The thing Sonny had spent most of his free time in Falcon Scott trying to enchant. The Siege Souvenir was now a transcendent memory, and a very special one at that. Several transcendent soul shards, as well as rivers of essence that formed numerous shadow strings, had gone into its creation. The difficulty Sonny had met was merely one of scope. Of all the enchantments he had learned and recreated before, that one was the fastest and most difficult. However, there was no alternative. The long javelin possessed only 2 enchantments. The first one was Death Dealer, which Sonny had copied from Morgan's warbow. Bestowing that one to the Devil's Needle had been hard, but also somewhat straightforward. It was the most destructive single-target enchantment in his arsenal, and so nothing else would have done. It was also extremely, dreadfully gluttonous in its consumption of essence, but not gluttonous enough as far as Sonny was concerned. That was where the second enchantment he had bestowed on the Siege Souvenir came in. That one had no name, because it was invented by him. Creating it was not technically hard, but required Sonny to teach himself an entirely new facet of weaving, as well as accomplish something he had never done before. Not simply copy, but disassemble and heavily modify an existing enchantment. The enchantment that had served as the basis was the Unbroken of the Midnight Shard. It allowed the wielder to access a vast reservoir of power when at death's doorstep, as long as the wielder refused to surrender and kept fighting against overwhelming odds. Sonny was not interested in augmenting the javelin with additional power, nor was he interested in creating a limitation tied to how close someone was to death or their character. What he was interested in was the reservoir itself. After all, Death Dealer had to be powered by something. And so, Sonny had spent many arduous hours studying the weave of the Unbroken, trying to understand how it worked, what element of the tapestry of ethereal strings was responsible for which part of it, and how to isolate the effect he wanted to achieve. How to create a reservoir of power that could feed the Siege Souvenir from the inside. In the end, with the timely help of the Graceless Dusk, he succeeded in both of his undertakings. The white javelin was much, much longer and heavier than an arrow. In fact, calling it a javelin was somewhat misleading, since it was more akin to a projectile worthy of a siege engine. Nevertheless, it possessed the capacity to deliver the same devastating force as an arrow sent flying with the help of the Death Dealer, only at much greater scale. A lot of power was needed to achieve that effect, much more power than anyone in Falcon Scott could have supplied in one go. That was why Sonny had enchanted the Siege Souvenir to possess an independent reservoir of essence, and siphoned a sea of it into the javelin over the days. He had created an entirely new type of memory. Weak memories usually possessed passive enchantments that were powered by the ambient essence used to manifest the memory. Powerful memories usually possessed active enchantments that required the wielder to manipulate and spend their essence to use them. The Siege Souvenir, meanwhile, possessed a dire enchantment that fed directly on the javelin essence. The result of his hard work was a tremendously powerful memory. It was so powerful that only refined material harvested from a corrupted creature could withstand the dreadful enchantments. Anything less would have disintegrated under strain. Even then, the Siege Souvenir was bound to be a one-use memory. The quill of the corrupted devil was not going to survive the release of its destructive power. There was one last hurdle to overcome to make use of it, though. Not just anyone could wield it. Even Sonny himself was not strong enough to make use of his creation in the intended way. That was why he had needed Saint to evolve. He needed a transcendent being to bring forth the Siege Souvenir's potential. And now, he had one. Goliath walked forward, the world quaking under the weight of his steps. The sea of nightmare creatures was flowing past his titanic feet, and all around them, the furious blizzard was slowly retreating, the winds dying down as pale starlight washed over the vast killing field. On the tall, broken wall of the city, thousands of turrets were roaring as they sent rivers of bullets into the attacking horde. The moonless night was torn apart by the glow of overheated barrels, the shine of swift tracer rounds, and the flashes of railgun rounds striking their targets in a conflagration of force, heat, and blinding light. A few of those heavy tungsten rounds had hit Goliath, only to disintegrate fruitlessly without leaving even a scratch on the stone hide of the menacing Titan. The soldiers of the First Army trembled as they joined the barrage. The mundane soldiers, the awakened, the towering war platforms, the few masters that were still alive after 2 weeks of the dreadful siege. On the ground near the breached sections of the wall, others were shivering as they craned their necks to stare at the approaching Titan. However, Sonny remained still.
Closer. Get closer.
He muttered to himself. He was perhaps the only human in Falcon Scott who wanted the colossal giant to walk faster. The Siege Souvenir could only be used once, so he had only one shot to shatter Goliath's stone carapace. Standing indifferently by his side, Saint raised the long javelin and placed it on her shoulder. The 4 shadows moved, fusing with her onyx armor. It shone with black radiance, and the feeling of great power emanating from the graceful figure of the taciturn stone knight instantly became much vaster, much deeper, and much more terrifying. At the same time, darkness flowed from Saint's gauntlet, slowly spreading across the length of the white javelin. Its whiteness was consumed, replaced by a lightless blackness. While the transcendent devil herself was augmented by the shadows, her weapon was now enhanced by the blade of darkness. There was the mantle of darkness as well, which made Saint stronger when surrounded by darkness and shadows. Sunny summoned the shadow lantern, allowing it to consume all surrounding light. Soon, the three of them, Sunny, Saint, and Jet, were hidden from sight within a circle of deep shadow.
Almost there,
he thought. The fastest of the nightmare creatures, those that had survived the barrage, meaning the strongest and most vile of them, were already moments away from reaching the wall, separating into 4 wide rivers of flesh to attack the 4 breaches. Goliath, meanwhile, was a few steps away from crossing half of the killing field. Sunny looked directly at the hateful giant and prepared to give Saint the command. At that moment, however, something changed. The Titan's massive, malformed head turned slightly, and his sole eye stared back. Sunny shivered. There were thousands and thousands of humans on the wall, and all of them must have looked like mere ants to Goliath. However, somehow, it felt as though the Titan was gazing directly at him. The weight of that gaze was almost physical. No, it was much more dire than that. Sunny gritted his teeth, feeling a very bad premonition grasp his heart.
What?
Then, the milky surface of the giant's eye quivered and slid away like an eyelid. Behind it, a second eye was revealed. Unlike the first one, which was white and had neither an iris nor a pupil, that one was of a furious red color, as if made of pure magma, and had 3 incandescent pupils floating in its depths, like windows into a scorching inferno. Suddenly, Sunny was enveloped by unbearable heat. He felt water streaming down on him and looked up to see the snow clouds melting in the skies above. Bizarrely, it was raining in the middle of the polar winter. Beneath him, the 70-meter-tall defensive wall of the city suddenly moved and groaned. Glancing over the parapet, Sunny saw with horror that the impregnable alloy was melting too. All around him, the mighty MWPs were collapsing into puddles of liquid metal, the pilots screaming as they burned alive, the barrels of the powerful turrets disappearing into streams of incandescent drops, and the mighty railguns grew silent. A few meters away, Samara screamed and flinched back from her rifle, a vicious burn marring her cheek. Across the entire southern section of the city wall, the great defensive barrier bent and deformed, moments away from collapsing entirely. Countless people were plummeting to their deaths or were consumed by the immolating heat. All of it happened in an instant.
Gods!
Knowing that there was no time to waste, Sunny shuddered as he changed his command slightly and sent it to Saint. The Onyx Knight instantly moved. Taking a single step, she raised the javelin behind her. For a moment, Saint's entire body turned into a graceful arch. From the tip of her foot, to her hip, to her shoulder, to her fist. Then, her hand whipped forward, and the battlements under her shattered from the immense pressure. Even her vambrace cracked, shards of onyx falling like precious gems. At the last moment, the 4 shadows slid from her fingers and wrapped themselves around the siege souvenir. The long, immeasurably heavy javelin shot forward with the speed of lightning. Immediately, there was a deafening boom of sound barriers being pierced, and a powerful shockwave rolled across the battlement, throwing people off their feet. The artificial memory streaked across the black sky like a line of pure darkness, creating a whirlpool of hurricane winds in its wake. A split second later, it hit Goliath right in the eye. There was a flash of light, and then a world-shaking thunderclap. And then, the sound of shattering stones. The siege souvenir plunged right between the Titan's three pupils, disappearing into the red molten eye entirely. Then, it burst from the back of the giant's head in an explosion of broken stone.
Your memory has been destroyed.
As Sunny watched in stunned silence, vast cracks snaked through Goliath's head. The Colossus froze in a strange pose, its torso leaning slightly back. Its eye was destroyed, and his head shattered and fell apart. Giant slabs of stone plummeting down from a great height. The walking mountain swayed, twitched, and then slowly started to tilt. Everyone, both the humans and the nightmare creatures, froze, watching the Titan fall in utter shock. Sunny blinked.
What just happened?
As if responding, the spell whispered into his ear.
You have slain a fallen Titan, minor shard of the Stone Titan. Your shadow grows stronger.
The colossal headless body of Goliath tilted forward and then started to fall. Because of its enormous size, it seemed as though the giant's corpse slowly floated through the air instead of crashing down in an obliterating avalanche of stone. However, hundreds of nightmare creatures below were already panicking as they tried to flee and escape being crushed to death. Sunny froze, momentarily stunned. He had killed the damn bastard? How? That was not what was supposed to happen. Sunny had poured countless hours into creating the siege souvenir and making sure that Saint would transcend in time. However, he had never expected to slay the fallen Titan with one strike. A Titan was a Titan. They were not supposed to die so easily. The plan was for the javelin to shatter the stone carapace on the chest of the giant, creating a path toward his heart. Master Jet was supposed to enter the breach and destroy Goliath's soul cores from within, while Sunny and Saint would attack from the outside. Together, they were meant to slowly bring the giant down and maybe even survive the process. When the Titan had revealed his incandescent eye and started melting the city wall, Sunny was forced to switch targets and command Saint to aim for the eye instead. He had never thought that Goliath would be killed by that single strike. Was that eye the Titan's Achilles heel? Kim had not noticed a pronounced vulnerability after they encountered the giant on the coastal highway, though. Maybe her powers were not enough to see it. Or the vulnerability only exposed when Goliath revealed his inner hidden eye. In any case, the Titan was undoubtedly dead. Sunny had killed him. For a moment, a dark glee ignited in his heart.
That's for Erebus Field, you foul bastard. And for killing me, too. That is payback for almost killing.
But then, his glee disappeared. By all accounts, Sunny should have felt exhilarated. He had killed a Titan after all. But instead of joy, he felt chills running down his spine. Suddenly tense, Sunny looked around. The armaments of the defensive barrier were all but destroyed, and the wall itself was damaged and deformed. A few sections had collapsed entirely, but most still stood. The defenders had suffered heavy losses, especially among the pilots burned to death with their MWPs. Many soldiers had lost their rifles, and the outer layers of their powered armor suits were severely damaged. However, there were still enough of them alive to continue the fight. Luckily, most awakened had managed to dismiss their steel memories, saving them from being destroyed, and were now summoning them back. Everyone was still in utter shock, mesmerized by the sight of the slowly toppling Colossus. Something was wrong, though. Very wrong. Goliath should not have died that easily, or that fast. Master Jet, who had been hanging outside the wall, ready to push herself forward to follow the plan and attack the Titan, climbed back and looked at him, a rare expression of bewilderment written on her face.
Sonny, what the hell? How?
He did not answer, staring past her at the falling mountain.
I killed him. I did.
Even before the body fell, wide cracks appeared all across it. Chunks of stone were splintering off and falling. From the distance, it almost looked as if the giant had been diseased, his skin covered by sores and ulcers. And the cracks, behind some of them, instead of solid stone, there was nothing but darkness, as if parts of the Titan's body had been hollowed out long before the battle. Moments before the massive corpse crashed into the ground, Sonny's eyes widened.
Curse it.
In the next second, the colossal mass of stone collided with the earth, making the whole world shake. Enormous clouds of snow, dirt, and debris rose into the air, and countless nightmare creatures were crushed under the obliterating weight. A thunderous roar rolled over the killing field, and shards of stone shot outward like bullets, decimating even more abominations. One more section of the wall collapsed. However, that was not what Sonny was looking at. His gaze was locked on the massive corpse itself. When Goliath's body hit the ground, large portions of it cracked like the shell of a rotten egg. And from within, a tide of darkness flowed, eviscerating the few wounded nightmare creatures that still clung to life and stretched toward the broken city wall like black tentacles.
The heart of darkness,
Sonny whispered. The river of black beetles had mysteriously disappeared some days ago, and almost at the same time, Goliath's speed had decreased. The beetles liked to tunnel through mountains and devour mighty creatures from within. The fallen Titan had been like a walking mountain himself, and mighty beyond belief as well. Someone should have guessed that the giant might have been parasitized by the legion of the tiny, dreadful creatures. But no one had. It was clear in hindsight. Sonny himself had been too blinded by the threat of the Titan to consider such a possibility. His preconceived notions of what constituted power and his animosity against the stone giant resulted in a ruinous case of tunnel vision.
Damn it!
He glanced at the city defenses once again, realizing that almost everything that could have been used against vast swarms of tiny vermin had been destroyed by Goliath. The First Army had been prepared to face one overwhelming enemy, not myriads of dangerous but comparatively weak creatures. He looked at Jet, his lips trembling.
Bloodwave.
She frowned.
What?
Sonny grabbed the Soul Reaper by the shoulders and barked.
Bloodwave! Summon Bloodwave here! He's our best hope of stopping the Heart of Darkness.
She hesitated for a short moment, then looked beyond the wall and hissed an explicit curse. Then, Jet took a step back and started summoning a memory that was supposed to give the fearsome saint a signal to abandon his duty of protecting the ships and join the battle. Sonny, meanwhile, was already moving, calling upon a few memories of his own. He had no idea how they would be able to handle both the vast horde of nightmare creatures that had come with Goliath and the tide of black beetles with the defensive barrier ruined and barely holding. The wall was severely damaged, and many of the soldiers had either died or were rendered helpless, their weapons destroyed. And yet, they had no other choice but to fight and claw the victory out of fate's grasp somehow. There was simply nowhere to retreat. few moments, both Sunny and Jet stood motionless, staring at the tide of enemies advancing at the damaged wall. Their faces were grim. Eventually, Soul Reaper spoke in a dark tone.
"This is bad. This is really bad."
That was an understatement. Currently, Falcon Scott was facing two threats. The first one was the uncountable horde of nightmare creatures that had followed Goliath and was now flowing across the killing field like a dark tide. Some of them had already reached the deformed barrier and engaged the defenders of the breaches in a furious melee. Some infiltrated the city through the new fissures in the melted wall and were now rampaging in the staging area. With the turrets destroyed and the mighty railguns heavily damaged, there was no way to slow down the advance of the horde. Even the MWPs were destroyed, and most of the soldiers had either lost their weapons or were seriously injured. The only ones who remained relatively unscathed were the Awakened. There were around 700 of them on the southern section of the wall, and most were still able to fight. Reinforcements were coming from the other three sections of the wall, but it was going to take some time for them to arrive. Time they did not have. The second threat was the Heart of Darkness. 4 rivers of dark beetles were flowing toward the ravaged wall, reaching for it like giant black claws. Each beetle was capable of biting through powerful armor-type memories, metal, and flesh. Their only redeeming quality was that the tiny vermin were not too hard to crush, which was why Army Command had planned to rely heavily on the powerful defensive armaments in case the Dark Swarm showed up. With those armaments mostly destroyed, the danger posed by the Heart of Darkness had risen tremendously. There were several ascended with aspects suitable to face such an enemy as well, but some of them had died in the past 2 weeks, while others were not on the southern section of the wall since no one had expected the Heart of Darkness to attack that day.
Damn it.
Gritting his teeth, Sunny looked at Jet.
So what do we do?
At that time, a familiar flaming arrow, albeit much weaker than it had been during the battle against the devouring cloud, flew into the massive beetles from somewhere much further down the wall. Winter was still alive at least. Master Jet let out an angry hiss.
There is no choice but to retreat to the secondary defense perimeter and enact the following protocol. However, even that is impossible right now. If we don't want to lose the city, we need to push the horde back and give the men enough time to run. We also need to obliterate the damned bugs.
Push back the horde. Sunny suddenly felt cold. There were so many holes in the city wall now that it was useless. That meant that the only way to stall the abominations was to sortie out and face the nightmare creatures on the killing field. Blade against claw. Needless to say, that was nearly a suicide mission. Even if the defenders of Falcon Scott succeeded, their losses would be staggering. There was another option, of course. The Awakened could abandon the mundane soldiers and run. Logically speaking, leaving mundanes to die and preserving the arguably more valuable asset was a valid strategy. War was not a purely logical affair, though. The most reasonable strategy was not always the best strategy. Things like spirit, morale, and mutual trust had much greater weight than Sunny had once thought. An army without these intangible qualities would be doomed. As a colonel and an ascended, Master Jet was the senior officer on the southern section of the wall and the person in charge. The decision was hers, and Sunny did not envy her position one bit. She lingered for a few moments, then took a deep breath and shouted, her voice spreading far and wide due to the effects of a special memory.
This is Soul Reaper Jet. All Awakened assemble in cohorts and prepare to sortie. We must push the enemy back. All mundane personnel abandon the wall. I repeat, abandon the wall. I am ordering a full retreat to the secondary defense line.
As soon as the echo of her voice disappeared into the cold night, Jet stepped toward a messenger who had lost his footing during the Titan's attack, grabbed the man by the collar, and pulled him to his feet with one powerful motion. The slightly disoriented soldier stared at her with a pale face. She looked at him somberly for a moment, and then said quietly,
"Inform Army Command to prepare the Rampart Protocol, and be ready to activate it as soon as I give the command. If I die, they should act at their discretion."
The frightened man nodded and disappeared, using his aspect ability to run at incredible speed. With that done, Jet glanced at Sunny. She remained silent for a moment, then smiled darkly.
"Are you ready?"
Sunny shook his head.
Not even a little bit.
Soul Reaper laughed and turned to the killing field. Her smile disappeared like a phantom.
"Well, tough. While the Awakened are fighting off the nightmare creatures, someone has to deal with the bugs. They absolutely cannot be allowed to enter the city. I'll stop the left swarm. Send that awesome echo of yours to face the middle left one, and go to the middle right yourself. Bloodwave will handle the last one. With some luck, the Ascended who are supposed to deal with them in the first place will arrive to reinforce us before everyone dies. The couple of them who are still alive."
Sunny looked at her with a dubious expression.
How am I supposed to fight against countless thousands of tiny bugs?
Master Jet sighed.
"You're resourceful. Figure something out. And if you do, let me know. I'm asking myself the same question."
With that, she turned away to give the orders to her cohort. Sunny did the same. Belle, Dorn, Samara, Luster, and Kim were looking at him, their eyes uncertain.
You all heard the boss. We are going to sortie with the rest. Then push forward and block one of the beetle swarms. I'll take points. Samara, you lost your rifle, so you just blast any that get past me with essence. You'll be our secondary slayer. Luster, support Sam. Belle, Dorn, and Kimmy, you guys will protect Luster and Samara. Don't let the bugs bite through your armor.
His soldiers looked at each other, then silently nodded. A few moments later, Soul Reaper's voice rolled across the battlements once again.
"Attack!"
The special sheets built into the wall had mostly been destroyed or damaged, so the Awakened had to use another means to sortie into the killing field. Some rappelled down, some summoned memories capable of slowing one's fall, and some simply used the exposed framework of the Great Barrier to swiftly climb to the ground. The few surviving masters stationed on the southern wall went first to clear the landing. Saint mounted Nightmare, who leapt from one protruding sheet of deformed alloy to another, reaching the swarming abominations in mere seconds. Wielding the cruel sight, she quickly slaughtered the nearest enemies. Sunny was not far behind. He glided through the air using the Dark Wing, then dismissed it a couple dozen meters above the ground and plummeted down, landing among the nightmare creatures like a cannonball. The sin of Soulless danced, effortlessly slicing through flesh and bone. It took Sunny only a few seconds to carve out a small island of safety. The members of his cohort joined him, forming a beachhead. More Awakened followed behind them, grim determination shining in their eyes. Everyone knew that for many, if not most of them, this was going to be the last fight. Nevertheless, no one tried to flee or turn back. Cutting down a lunging beast, Sunny glanced at the descending Awakened. Surely all of them valued their lives. Maybe if left alone, most would listen to their fear and their desire to survive, and choose to save themselves instead. However, they had all been swept up in the moment and lost their reason. They were all individuals, but more than that, they were also part of something much larger right now. A crowd, a mob. A collective had no fear of death because the destruction of one of its small parts did not mean the destruction of the whole, Maybe that was how these people suppressed their utterly natural and reasonable desire to live, knowing that even without them, the larger entity they belonged to would continue to exist. Was that what Professor Opal had meant when he had said that humanity needed a bit of stupidity to survive? In any case, the feeling was alien to Sonny. He had spent most of his life being refused and rejected by the collective, so naturally he valued himself more. There was nothing more valuable than himself and the things he held dear. And yet, here he was, charging into the horde of nightmare creatures with the rest of the awakened of the First Army. Of course, his situation was vastly different. Sonny was pretty sure of his ability to at least escape alive, no matter what happened. But he was still taking a great risk for no apparent reason. Was it stubbornness? Was it pride? Was it spite and unwillingness to admit defeat? Or had he become infatuated by the same sense of collective responsibility as these selfless people? He truly did not know. However, the word selfless seemed rather vile and frightening to Sonny. After all, he was all he had. Without it, what was the point of staying alive? Gritting his teeth, Sonny brandished the Sin of Solace and pushed forward, cutting through one abomination after another like a ruthless, eerily graceful butcher. At some point, his 3 shadows joined him, wrapping themselves around his body. The 4th one he had sent to help Nightmare. Sonny was surrounded by a fine haze of blood, but whatever drops of it fell on his black tunic, they rolled off the soft silk without leaving the slightest trace. The graceless dusk remained immaculately pristine. He left the hundreds of awakened behind and advanced into the horde, leading his cohort toward the river of black beetles. Luckily, it was not very hard to reach, because the dark river was flowing forward to meet them as well. Before the irregulars clashed with the claw of the Heart of Darkness, though, Bloodwave finally arrived at the battlefield. The mighty saint landed like a falling star, causing the earth to split and a shockwave to spread outward in all directions. Away from water, most of his powers would be of no use, but a transcendent was still a transcendent. Wearing dark gray armor sewn of sharkskin and wielding 2 curved swords, Bloodwave instantly turned into a whirlwind of steel, moving with such speed and force as to resemble an annihilating blur. Countless nightmare creatures disappeared into it, and the blurry twister instantly turned red from the mass of blood. More than that, the champion of the House of Night was perfectly aware of his vulnerability on land. For that reason, his soul arsenal included many powerful memories to account for that weakness, among other things. As soon as Bloodwave appeared, 3 echoes manifested by his side. One was a monstrous crab the size of a house. One resembled a towering golem of wet clay. And the last one was ethereal and elusive, like a creature made of fog. Sonny's eyes glinted when he realized that the creature shrouded in fog was transcendent itself. It would have been powerless underwater, but here, under the walls of Falcon Scott, the Echo could exert truly devastating power. A small shadow fell from the sky, and a familiar black bird landed on Bloodwave's shoulder, cawing something into his ear. A moment later, the Saint and his echoes changed direction, heading for one of the 4 rivers of darkness.
Maybe we can pull this off,
Sonny thought to himself. Throwing all unnecessary thoughts out of his head, Sonny concentrated on carving a path toward the tide of beetles. Somewhere behind him, hundreds of awakened were desperately pushing against the horde of frenzied abominations, killing and dying without holding back. An ear-splitting groan of tearing metal thundered as another section of the wall collapsed, unable to withstand its weight after suffering severe damage to the inner structure. He paid it no attention. How am I supposed to fight against the damned bugs? The Sin of Solus could cut through dozens with each swipe, but there were countless thousands of them. Trying to kill the entire swarm with a sword was no different from trying to cut the sea. He had a couple of tools capable of mass destruction, shadow manifestation, and the strike of thunder. He could also control the swarm somewhat with the dying wish. Best of all, the beetles would have to try very, very hard to bite through the marble shell. Sonny was not too worried about his defense. It was the offense that posed an issue. I guess I'll just have to manage somehow, he said to himself. A few moments later, the mass of nightmare creatures around them diminished, and those who did lunge at the cohort looked more panicked than consumed by bloodlust. It seemed that the Heart of Darkness cared not about whom it devoured, humans or abominations. And there, behind these last few monsters, the tide of darkness was rushing towards Sonny once again.